Today we are going to learn about the polity of the local church or the government of the local church. Right, this is my outline for today. I'm going to give the outline ahead of time so that you can follow through my lecture. First, we'll see the meaning of the word polity, then the importance of studying the polity of the church, the different church governments. I'm not going to deal all church governments, but traditional church governments historically, what Christians have argued for, right? Then a biblical case for congregationalism, then different views within congregationalism, all right? Views within congregationalism. And then I'm going to give a biblical case for plurality principle. And then finally, we'll look at a Baptist polity, all right? When you talk about the word polity simply means governance, how one governs a house or a country, right? So if church is an institution, if it is an organism, well, God cares how we govern the church or how the church is governed, all right? Craig Allison says there are few issues in the doctrine of ecclesiology where people don't want to talk about, or they're bored, if you will. And one of those is the polity of the church or the church government, all right? And there's a theologian who wrote the view on Episcopalianism, who argued that church government is not that important. However, I would give you the importance of studying the polity of the church. I would give the importance of studying the polity of the church. First, it flows from the character of God. Why should we study the polity of the church or how the church is governed? First, it flows from the very character of God, because Trinity has an order, right? You have God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And within Trinity, you have Son submitting to the Father, and then Holy Spirit submitting both to the Father and to the Son. You see this order, but that does not necessarily mean order is creating chaos within the Trinity, right? So governance and order flows from the Godhead. Secondly, Christ is the head of the church. At the same time, in 1 Peter 5, he has called the elders of local churches as under shepherds, right? Those who are subservient to the head, that is Christ. So Christ himself delegated some kind of authority to the elders. And then thirdly, Acts chapter 20, the Holy Spirit has appointed elders, right? He has made the elders as overseers to pastor the church. You see that Paul saying that to the elders of the Ephesian church. So that's the third reason why we study or why we should study the polity of the local church. And then finally, if you see, God cares about order. If you look at the New Testament, God is enabling Paul to write a letter to the church of Corinth because the church was out of order. They were not following order during Lord's Supper. They were not following order while they worship. And you see Paul is correcting them. So church order does matter. A church order does matter. And God cares how the church is governed. Why? Because he died for the church. God bought the church by his own blood. So I think God cares how we govern the church or how the church is functioning. All right? Is what Jonathan Lehman says. Church order is not the gospel issue, but it does protect the gospel for generations to come. All right, let me repeat that. Jonathan Lehman says church order or church governance or church polity is not the gospel issue, but we need proper church government or proper church polity to preserve the gospel for the upcoming generation, right? And here is where he gets this from, I think, Ephesians 4. If you look at it, people say church government is not important, but I think Ephesians 4:11 to 16 shows us that church governance or the order in the church is very important. In fact, if your church does not have proper order, that will hamper the growth of the church, i.e., people will not grow to become like Christ, and that is because the church is not governing properly. Right? I say that because Ephesians 4:11. So Christ Himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. So you see order right there. Christ is setting the order. Right? We don't believe in apostles anymore. We believe they and prophets were foundation. Right? They were foundation to the church. You see that in chapter 2, and that's why Paul is not gonna give a case for uh, for the seizing of the apostolic gifts and the gift of prophecy. All right, and then evangelist simply means church planters, or those who train church people how to evangelize, and then they go out and they plant churches basically. And you have pastors and teachers. Pastors and teachers, I think, two different gifts. Teachers are not pastors, but all pastors are teachers, right? And why did God give them? To equip His people. So you see, right order is necessary to equip God's people for works of service. And when God's people are equipped by pastors and teachers, what happened? Right? When they serve, when equipped saints serve the church, the body grows up. So you see that right order is necessary, is vital, is indispensable, if you will, for the building up of the church. And we should do this until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature. Did you see that? Right church governance followed rightly brings maturity in the members, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. All right. Now, here is where Baptists and Presbyterians would disagree. They would say, here the ministry is not done by every saint, but it is done by the clergy, or the presbyter, the priest, and the bishop, right? But I think if you look at the original language, that interpretation does not flow out from the text, right? I think NIV gets it right. If you look at the Greek, I think every person, every member ought to be equipped, all right? All right, another thing is, if people say every member is not serving, then how would you interpret verse 26? The body itself grows when every part does its work. How can every part do the work when every part is not being equipped? And look at verse 15, right? Instead of speaking the truth in love. Who is speaking the truth in love? Well, every member, because he's equipped. You see that? So church governance affect the growth and health of church members. In other words, church governance affect your discipleship program. Church governance affect your discipleship program. Right? Jonathan Lehman, in one of his lecture, he gives this illustration, right? This illustration goes like this. You see a gym trainer, and at the first day, he's showing you how to use the dumbbells, and he's showing you how to lift weights. And the first day, he did not allow you to even hold the dumbbells. He was just showing you. And the second day, he showed you, and then later he gave you the dumbbells, and then he showed you how to lift weights, and then he put weights on your shoulders, right? And then you started doing it. And Jonathan Lehman would ask, which is the purpose of going to gym? To see the gym trainer perform some gymnastism, or you learning from him how to do the gym? And the answer, of course, is the second one, right? So that's the essence of Ephesians 4, I believe. So church governance, church polity affects how every member is discipled, all right? Not only that, it affects the mission of the church. That is the reason why we should learn about the polity of the church, or the church government. And there's a lie which many Christians believe, that the Bible has nothing or very little to say about the doctrine of church, right? I think that's a lie. Right? I think you see every book speaking about the doctrine of church. I don't think it would be overstatement to say if you're not part of a church, I don't know how to apply the text to you, because epistles were written to churches, right? Right from the book of Acts, you see epistles were written to churches. Yeah, so it matters how we view the polity of the church or the governance of the church. All right. So we saw polity, we saw the importance of learning about church government. We will see now different church governments. We will see now different church governments. All right. There are three traditional church government: Episcopalianism, all right, and then there is Presbyterianism, and then finally Congregationalism. Here is what theologians would say. The government of the church, or how the church is governed, is not a first level issue. Or you don't see one church government explicitly taught in the scripture. Or, put differently, you can see every government implied in the New Testament. I would partially agree to that and then say, yes, maybe. But I think congregationalism is clearly taught throughout the New Testament, as we will see in a minute. But I think we should appreciate every government, at least Presbyterianism and Episcopalianism. So what we'll do is we will not right away deny Episcopalianism and Presbyterianism, but we would see advantages of these government and some plus points, if you will, and we will appreciate where appreciation is due. But I think a very consistent and biblical teaching about the government of the church is congregationalism. What is Episcopalianism? Let us define the words Episcopalian and bishop, right? What does Episcopalian mean? Episcopalian simply means bishop, right? Or the one who oversees. Okay, Episcopalianism refers to the form of church government, right, which is ruled by bishop, in whom ultimate authority resides. That's what Craig Allison says in his book Sojourners and Strangers. So defining the usage of the term bishop in the Episcopalian circle, Peter Thorne notes, for some, bishop is used of the pastor who in the hierarchy of clergy is above the deacon and the presbyter, or you can call presbyter as priest, and constitute an altogether different and higher order of ministry. In other words, what he's saying is, when some people say the word bishop, what they're referring to is the highest order. First, there is a bishop, and then you see presbyters or priests, and then you see a deacon. So Episcopalianism, right, argues for three tiered or three layers of leadership. At the top you have bishop, and then you have presbyters, and then you have deacons. Further, Peter Thorne writes, in this understanding, bishops are seen as belonging to the historical episcopate and of being in apostolic succession. Some Episcopalians, pardon me for saying Presbyterians, some Episcopalian would argue, you see, bishop is flowing from the office of, the office of bishop is flowing from the office of apostles. So you see, we are maintaining apostolic succession, and that's why we think Episcopalianism is a biblical government, right? Further, Thorne writes, the Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Eastern, Old Catholic, united like the Church of South India, Church of North India, and Anglican churches, as well as a few national Lutheran churches like Scandinavia, ascribe to this view. So Episcopalian government is a broad government. Even Catholics would come there. And you would see the Anglicans or the Orthodox guys right? Separating themselves from Catholics, right? So wherever you see a hierarchy, all right, there you see a Episcopalian government. There are many denominations under this government. You have Methodists, you have Lutherans. Of course, they differ from the Catholics and Anglicans a bit, all right? So it's a broad government. Many denominations come into that. Basically, there is a three level of government, or a three level of authority. You see bishop. Right now, sometime bishop would not be an international bishop, but he would be a national bishop. So it depends on denomination and church how they would view their bishop. But bishop has the ultimate authority. But when you ask the Episcopalians, they would say, no, you're going the wrong order. You should come from down. Whenever a member is baptized, he has authority, just like the bishop. He can serve the church, but there are categorization in the service. That's what they would say. So they would tell us not to come from up, but go from down. Whenever everybody is baptized, saved, baptized, he can serve the church. And then he can become a deacon, then he can become a presbyter, and then finally a bishop. They would say that's the order. Instead of coming from top, come from the bottom. Now, he further writes, Peter Tone further writes, in other denomination, including those of a Methodist and Lutheran origin, bishop is used of the clergy person who is the superintendent of a given area wherein are multiple parishes, that means churches and pastors. However, as bishop superintendent, he or she is not considered above other clergy in terms of holy hierarchy, divine order or appointment, or unique relation to the apostles and the apostolic age. What he's saying is, when you come to Methodists and Lutherans, right, the bishop, right, is treated equal to presbyters and pastors, right? Well, there is functional difference, but when you come to when it comes to service, he's equal like the presbyters. But however, when you come to holy hierarchy and divine order and appointment and unique relationship to the apostles, so first there were apostles and there were bishops, and then the order comes down. So they would say bishop is very close to the apostle. He's like he's continuing the legacy of apostles. Now, not every Episcopalian would say this, but most of them believe that we have an apostolic succession. So we as Baptists should be very careful not to put everybody under the same umbrella, right? We should deal case by case, church by church, all right? It's very complicated government. It's very complicated, all right? Episcopalian churches are governed by a three-tiered rule, as I told you already, namely bishop presiding over everyone and having the ultimate authority. And there are elders who are also known as presbyters and priests, who also rule, but under the auspices of the bishops. And then the deacons who serve under the supervision of the bishops and elders. So did you see that? You see bishops and then presbyters or priests or elders, whatever you want to call them. And then you see the deacons. Now, Craig Allison explicates the function of the three-tiered ministry in the Episcopalian Church. All right, Craig Allison, he explicates how Episcopalianism works. Okay, he notes the ultimate authority of the bishops is exercised in the act of maintaining the three ecclesial offices: the right to consecrate other bishops, and to ordain priests and deacon belongs only to the bishops. So only bishops can appoint other bishops, and then presbyters or priests, and then deacons. So bishop will have the final say. Presbyters or priests, the second order of clergy, are ordained ministers of a local church or parish, with the responsibility to lead worship, preach, pray, and administer baptism and the Lord's Supper. So they don't have the same authority as the bishops do, but they can lead the worship service, they can preach, pray, and administer the ordinances of the local church. And deacons, the third order, are ordained servants whose responsibility is to help the bishops and priests. So deacons exist to help the presbyter and the bishop. All right. Thus, we can witness a hierarchy within the Episcopalian government. All right. There is a layer of accountability. That's what they would say. Now, explaining the Episcopalian church government, Robert Saucy similarly concurs the essential concept of this government, i.e., Episcopalian, is that the right to consecrate other bishops and ordain priests and deacons belong only to the bishop. This provides for a succession of bishops and their rulership over the two subordinate ministries. So bishop can ordain the priest or presbyter or elder, and also the deacon. So by doing that, he is preserving the rulership, all right, and then he's making them the rest subordinate to him, all right. Now that's how it works. That's how it works. Now there is the hierarchy in Episcopalianism, all right. There are three important components in the governing of the Episcopalian Church. Right, three important. First, there's a general convention, all right, and underneath you have the House of Bishops, and underneath that you have the House of Deputies. So first you have the General Convention, then you have the House of Bishops, and then you have the House of Deputies. What is General Convention? It functions as the highest form of authority in Episcopalianism, which summons once in 3 years, okay? The General Convention, it is the highest form of authority in Episcopalianism, and then it summons once in 3 years. It consists of both the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. So the House of Bishops and House of Deputies make up the General Convention, all right? And then you have the House of Bishops. It is composed of all the bishops of the Episcopalian Church. Then finally, you have the House of Deputies. Craig Allison writes, the House of Deputies is composed of not more than 4 ordained persons. So who ought to be included in the House of Deputies? Not more than 4 ordained persons. Who are they? Presbyters, priests, and deacons. So they are ordained, not more than four, and then not more than 4 lay people from each church. So who constitutes the House of Deputies? Not more than 4 ordained ministers, i.e. presbyters, priests, and deacons. And then you have not more than 4 lay people from each church. They constitute the House of Deputies. All right. And then Craig Allison summarizes the structure of the Episcopalian church government aptly. He details the function of Episcopalianism as follows. Listen to me. The Episcopal Church in the United States, all right, now it differs from country to country, state to state. He's talking about US. Provides an example of Episcopalian government. At the highest level of authority is the General Convention. So you see the General Convention, then then you will see the House of Bishops, and then you see the House of Deputies. So the General Convention, the governing body that convenes every 3 years, and that consists of both the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. The House of Bishops is composed of all the bishops of the Episcopalian Church in the United States. The House of Deputies is composed of not more than 4 ordained persons, presbyters, priests, and deacons, and not more than 4 lay people from each church. So the House of Bishops elects one of its own bishops as the presiding bishop of the church, with the choice being confirmed by the House of Deputies. All right, so they would say, yes, you can see hierarchy, but each layer is accountable to other layer. Okay, so House of Deputies is accountable to House of Bishops, and House of Bishop is accountable to General Convention. All right, this presiding bishop serves as a 9-year term, as chief pastor and primate of the church, and has the responsibility to lead the church and its policies and strategies. So he can speak the word to the church, to the world. He can provide for interim bishops, right? And then he can govern the diocese, and then he can convince the other bishops. Then he can preside over the meetings of the House of Bishops and the joint session of the House of Bishops and House of Deputies at the General Convention, and visit each diocese to consult with its officers and lay people, to preach the word and to celebrate the Eucharist. So he can just go around the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies, and he can just govern everything. All right? But again, we should be careful not to say that they bishops have the ultimate authority, in the sense like the House of Bishops and the House of Deputy do not contribute anything. That's a misrepresentation of Episcopalianism. Yes, there is a hierarchy, but I think there is immense accountability within the structure. So that is Episcopalianism. All right. Now you would ask me, where do we find this kind of structure in the New Testament? All right. Episcopalians squarely agree that this form of government is not explicitly taught in the New Testament. However, they argue that this form of polity is seen in its infant state in the New Testament. All right. For instance, Peter Tone argues the New Testament, against the background of holy hierarchy in the Old Testament, suggests the seed, if not the full flower, the principle, if not the full concept, of the differentiation of ordained ministers. So they would say, yes, I know that, we know that it is not a full-fledged government, all right? But in the New Testament, we can see seed, if not the flower, concept, if not the whole structure. So you see Episcopalianism in its infant state in the New Testament. Now they would say this, Peter Tone further writes, consider, the Lord Jesus commissioned and sent out not only the 12, but also the 72, all right? Luke 9 and 10. So he called the 12, but he sent out 72. And then the relation of the Apostle Paul to those who assisted him, like Timothy and Titus. So you see apostles, and then apostles had disciples. Who are they? Right? Timothy and Titus. And then Timothy and Titus, and the relationship between Timothy and Titus and those whom they ordained and appointed, right? Paul is telling Timothy to ordain elders in every church. And then Paul is telling to Titus, right, who is in Crete, to appoint elders in every town. So you see that Jesus sending out the 12 and also the 72, and then Paul, who is an apostle of Jesus Christ, sending out Timothy and Titus. And then Timothy and Titus are called to do the same. So you see a hierarchy over there, argues Peter Tone. All right? They would say this is the pattern in the New Testament. All right? And he further writes, note also the intriguing reference to, right, to the phrase in Hebrews 13:17, them that have the rule over you. So you see that elders or leaders are having rule over you. So there is some kind of ruling on the local church. And then you see 1 Thessalonians, to them, 5:12, 1 Thessalonians 5:12, to them who are over you in the Lord. So there is definitely a difference between a clergy and a laity. There is a hierarchy in the church, if you will. All right, and then he further argues, 1 Corinthians 16:15 and 16. And to such as these, the household of Stephanus, right? That phrase over there again. So further, it is possible, Peter Tone argues, that James, the Lord's brother, was what was later called a monarchical bishop in Jerusalem. That means one guy who is the ultimate authority. It is not hard to see the threefold ministry in its infancy, he concludes. All right? So you see Jesus electing the 72 along with 12, and then the 12 making disciples, right? So you see Paul making Timothy and Titus as his protege, and then um, you see Paul is telling to Timothy and Titus to do the same with those who are subservient to them. All right, so you see a hierarchy, and then you can see phrases like this: elders are over you, they are ruling over you. Hebrews 13:17, 1 Thessalonians 5:12, and then Acts 21:18. Right? You see James, who just stood up and spoke, and he concluded the Jerusalem Council. Right? So he is the pillar, if you will, of the church of Jerusalem, according to Galatians 2. So these are some passages which are often quoted by Episcopalians to argue for their government. Now, points of appreciation, all right? There is much accountability, okay? There is much accountability, and we should appreciate them for this. Second, they want to protect the gospel and apostolic heritage, right? They're very concerned about heritage. They're very confessional, if you will. The Book of Common Prayers, right? They strictly follow it, okay? Right. And third, it's very systematic, all right? Very, very systematic, very, very structured, and we should appreciate that, right? They mean business with the church. Those are the three positives or 3 points of appreciation, all right? What we can learn from Episcopalian church government. All right, Presbyterian polity, Presbyterian church polity. Presbyterianism, according to Craig Allison, refers to the form of church government, right? We get this word by the Greek word presbyteros or presbyteroi, right? That is translated as elders. So refers to the form of church government by elders as representatives of the church. So you see that. So you see a hierarchy, but they would differ with the Episcopalian. They would say within the church there is hierarchy, and then they would say there is a presbytery in our district. Many bishops or many elders form one presbytery, right? And then presbytery form a synod, and then synod form a general convention. So they also believe in some kind of hierarchy, but they would say that, we don't have the ultimate authority, but we are the representatives of the church. We merely represent. But again, they would see a difference between clergy and laity, pastor or ordained people and people who are not ordained, lay people. All right. Robert Raymond defines Presbyterianism as a governance of the church by elders or overseers in graded courts. That means there's a grade, with these officers executing the responsibilities of their office in unison and on a parity with each other. That means, yes, there is a hierarchy, but mutuality is maintained, or there's a parity, there's a unison, and with the material care and service of the church being looked after by deacons. So there are only 2 kinds of officers, if you will. There are elders or presbyters, and then there are deacons. Presbyters take care of the church office, right, executing responsibilities. And then the material care and the service of the church is taken care by the deacons, right, known corporately as the diaconate, under the supervision of the elders and overseers. All right. Allison further writes, like congregationalism, but diverging from Episcopalianism, Presbyterianism has 2 church offices, elders and deacons. So they don't believe in bishops and then presbyters and then deacons. They just believe in elders and deacons. As for the graded courts, a slight difference in structure and nomenclature exists between Presbyterian churches and Roman Reformed churches, right? There is a slight difference between Presbyterian church and then Reformed church, all right? We won't go into the difference But here is what you should know about them. All right. So a session is composed of the teaching elder. All right. The teaching elder of the church and its ruling elder. So they would see a difference between a teaching elder and a ruling elder. Okay. So session, there's a session which is composed of a teaching elder and a ruling elder. All right. And they would call it a session. All of the teaching elders and one of the ruling elders from each of the churches in a geographical area from a presbytery. Okay. So all of the teaching elders and one of the ruling elder from each church form a group which is known as presbytery. And these pastors, local pastors, if you will, or elders, they submit, they're accountable to the presbytery in that particular region. So you see, again, some kind of accountability and hierarchy over here again. All right. And then you would see the second form of synod, right? These presbyteries form a synod. And then finally, you would see teaching elders and ruling elders selected by the presbyteries, right? They form a national level general assembly. So you see session, right? And then you see a synod, and then you see the general council or general assembly. So pastors, right? Teaching elder and then ruling elder. I'll tell you the difference in a minute. They form a presbytery, right? And presbytery is formed of all the teaching elders, all the teaching elders and one ruling elder, all right? And then these presbyteries form a synod, and then synods submit to the general assembly, okay? So this is Presbyterianism in a nutshell, okay? Now what is the difference between teaching elder and a ruling elder? Teaching elder is like the lead guy who does all the duties, right? He's like the lead pastor, if you will. And the ruling elder just is concerned about the structure of the church, the governance of the church. So they would see a difference between both, right? What do we believe? Well, we will deal with that passage from where they would bring this distinction when we deal about congregationalism, all right? The hierarchy in the Presbyterianism. So even in Presbyterianism, you can see a hierarchy. So at the local church level, right, there's a local church level. The local church is governed by the session, okay, which is composed of ruling elders elected by the membership. So the members only elect these elders. So you see they form a session, okay, with the teaching elder or minister as presiding officer, right? The presiding officer is the teaching elder. And then you see at the level of presbytery, the next highest ranking body is the presbytery, which includes all the ordained ministers or teaching elders and one ruling elder and each local congregation in a given district. And then you see at the level of synod, above the presbytery is a synod, and over the synod is a general assembly, the highest court, if you will. And then you see the general assembly. It is the highest form of government. So you see the local church, the presbytery. The presbytery includes all the teaching elders, one ruling elder from that vicinity, and then you see a synod, and then you see the general assembly. All right. So this is the structure of Presbyterianism. All right. This is the structure of Presbyterianism. All right. Scriptural proof. Scriptural proof again. The New Testament presents clear evidence that the care of the church was committed to elders. All right. So who is called to protect the care of the church? Well, elders. All right. Right. You can see that in the book of Acts. They are working alongside the leaders, the apostles, right, and who were leading the affairs of the church at Jerusalem. Acts 15, if you will. Acts 15, chapter 4. Acts 15, verse 4. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and elders, to whom they reported everything God had done through them. So you see elders and apostles taking care of the church affairs. And they would quote verse 22 and 23 from the same chapter. Then the apostles and elders with the whole church decided to choose some of their own men and send to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. They chose Judas called Barsabbas and Silas, men who were leaders among the believers. Right, with them they sent the following letter: the apostles and elders, your brothers, to the Gentile believers in Antioch, Syria, and Sicilia. So you see, elders are the prime guys who are taking care of the church alongside the apostles. And then they would point out to 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 4 and 5, right? You see, elder should be apt to lead, right? 3, 4, and 5, because the argument is, if he can't rule over his own house, how can he rule the house of God, i.e. the church? They would say there's some kind of ruling over there, right? And the reference to the rulers in the church undoubtedly applies to elders, they would argue. 1 Thessalonians 5:12, and this is the verse which is often quoted, I think, by Presbyterians and Episcopalians, right? I'm reading 1 Thessalonians 5:12. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you, who care for you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Okay? Hold them in the highest regard in love because of their work. Live in peace with each other, right? So they would see a distinction in this verse between those who rule and then those who give the word or those who care, right? They would say it is unquestionable, however, whether this reference, right, is not to the elders, right? To the elders, they would say the elders are supposed to rule, and then there's a distinction between elders. There are ruling elders, and then there are teaching elders. All right, ruling elders and teaching elders. So this is the scriptural evidence which they provide. They also provide Acts 15, right? We will look at Acts 15. I think Acts 15 divide us when we come to governance of church. Acts 15 is the main passage which is often quoted by Presbyterians and Episcopalians. All right, so this is the Presbyterian church government. All right, what can we appreciate about them? Well, there is hierarchy, right? And this hierarchy, they would argue, does not necessarily negate individual soul liberty. Okay? So taking them at their own words, all right? I would argue, yes, there is some kind of accountability, right? Unlike some Baptist churches where one guy is the sole guy, okay? Accountability is appreciated, right? And then they do this to protect the gospel, protect the doctrine. So they are worried about gospel fidelity, doctrinal fidelity, okay? And then fourthly, they believe in band of brothers, right? It's not one man show, right? They distribute among themselves responsibilities. So these are some things what we can appreciate in them. Okay, that is Presbyterianism.